Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of AZ Illustrated Politics, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national affairs. On tonight's show, a special one-on-one interview with Congressman Ron Barber on the hot topics of immigration, background checks, and health care. Then our weekly panel will discuss the legal threats to Jan Brewer's proposed Medicaid expansion, the controversy over the El Rio golf course, and this year's Tucson City Council elections. But first, a look at today's top stories.
Arizona residents should pay attention to their receipts as of June 1st. The state sales tax is dropping from 6.6% to 5.6%. In 2010, voters approved a 1-cent sales tax increase for 3 years, and it expires now. Last November, Arizona voters rejected a proposal to permanently extend that penny-on-the-dollar tax. The 1-cent sales tax brought in more than $900 million a year into the state coffers and helped avoid bigger budget cuts during the height of the recession. A new poll from Quinnipiac University shows Americans are not confident that Congress can pass an immigration reform bill. According to the numbers, 71% of those polled say they doubt Democrats and Republicans in Washington can reach an agreement on a comprehensive immigration reform bill. The poll was taken over the last week and has a 2.6% margin of error. And the Pima County Board of Supervisors is considering changing the law to prohibit people from selling things while standing on the median of a county roadway. The board is scheduled to consider a ban on pedestrian solicitation at its Tuesday night meeting, citing public safety hazards. The city of Tucson and the towns of Oro Valley and Marana have all enacted similar bans. If approved, the ordinance would also prohibit panhandling on county medians. And that's a look at tonight's headlines.
The Obama administration said today the financial outlook for Medicare improved slightly and Social Security has not worsened. But new data shows Americans still struggling to recover from the recession.
We examined the report from Federal Reserve economists, finding the average household has regained less than half its wealth since 2007.
Then we debate what's to be done about student loans as President Obama pressed Congress again today to prevent a doubling of some key interest rates July 1st.
We get two stories on Syria's civil war and its impact on the wider Middle East. Margaret Warner is on the ground in Beirut and spoke with the leader of the Free Syrian Army.
He said, I cannot understand why our friends in the West don't help us when they see how much the Iranians and the Russians are doing for Assad's forces.
And Ray Suarez looks at the plight of hundreds of thousands Syrian refugees who have poured into neighboring Jordan.
Plus, Mark Shields and David Brooks analyze the week's news.
That's all ahead on tonight's News Hour.
Tonight on Arizona Week, the recession is over, and Michael Chihak finds out if Arizona's municipalities are feeling the benefits of the recovery.
I've had so many meetings with the cities and stakeholders on this bill, and we've really conceded a lot to the cities. They had some legitimate concerns, and I believe we addressed them.
That's tonight at 8:30 on PBS 6.
Joining me tonight on AZ Illustrated Politics, former Pima County Democratic Party Chairman Jeff Rogers, former state lawmaker Frank Antinori, and local business consultant Miguel Ortega. Thanks to all of you guys for being here. But before we begin this discussion this evening, Congressman Ron Barber stopped by AZ Illustrated Politics to talk about what's happening in Washington. Congressman Barber, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be with you.
Wanted to begin tonight with some legislation that you are reintroducing in the House involving veterans' health care, and the idea is to allow veterans more flexibility in seeking health care alternatives outside of the Veterans Administration. Why is this important?
Well, it's important, and we'll be dropping this bill next week. It's called the Veterans Health Access Act, and it's important because a lot of veterans who return to their homes live in rural communities. Particularly in Arizona, we have veterans in Wilcox and Frida and other places that are in my district that are 2 hours or more away from the VA hospital. And so since many of these new veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are dealing with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, they need help and support where they live. They don't need to be traveling a couple of hours each way. So this bill will expedite or require the VA to expedite approving a local medical provider to deliver the care and the help that these veterans need. It makes sense to have their care close to their home.
And at the same time, we have this gigantic backlog of veterans' cases. How is it possible we've gotten to this problem as bad as it is? And how long will it take to resolve it?
Well, it's a huge problem. Our office deals every day with veterans who have been in the system waiting for a decision for as long as 2 years. And I just want to make sure that the community at large knows that we're there to help individual veterans with their cases, and we always do our best to expedite the decision. The backlog is really a function of an old system that just doesn't make sense. It's a paper system. What we really need is a medical records system that's electronic. What we need for sure is that the Department of Defense has the same electronic medical records as the VA, same format, so that when an individual leaves the military, their medical records can transfer easily and quickly to the VA. This will cut down on the weights and the mounds of paper that have to be gone through, and it really is the right way to go. So I'm on 4 bills in the Congress that deal with the backlog program. We have to solve it. It's just inexcusable that veterans would have to wait months and years to get benefits approved.
This week you also expressed concern about some furloughs for civilian defense workers as a result of the sequester. And we heard a lot about the sequester when it was first going into effect, and then we didn't hear so much about it. But are we starting to see the impacts of that now?
The impacts are enormous, and they're beginning to be felt. In the defense industry alone, or the Department of Defense, we're going to see over 8,000 civilian workers in Department of Defense installations furloughed starting July. That's a $24 million problem for our state in terms of lost income. It's going to hurt the individuals and their families. It's going to hurt small businesses who rely on customers to buy things and services. And it's certainly going to have a negative impact on our ability to maintain the work that these important civilian workers do. I have 2 installations in my district, Fort Huachuca and Davis-Monthan. Both will be harmed by these furloughs. Sequestration was one of the most irresponsible decisions that the Congress has made in a long time, and we really need to end it in this year, in this fiscal year, and have a better way to balance the budget going forward.
You've also got this Gang of 8 immigration bill moving through the Senate right now. Your concerns about what you see in that legislation before it gets over to the House? Well,
first of all, I'm encouraged that we have a bipartisan bill. The Gang of 8, as you know, is made up of 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. They cross the political spectrum, and they have worked very hard to bring the bill to the Judiciary Committee, where additional amendments were put onto the bill. It's now on the floor, getting ready to be debated in the Senate. It's a great step forward. We have to move to fix the broken immigration system. It's long overdue. But by the same token, we also have to make sure that the people that I represent as a border district member are safe in their homes and feel secure. So border security has to be a part of this, but it's time for us to move forward and fix the system that's so broken.
And you've expressed concern about your constituents being concerned about their own safety in their homes right now, but there are people who, within your party, who are concerned that there is too much militarization on the border. And where do you balance those?
Well, first of all, I think it's right to say that we have improved border security in many areas across the border, particularly the ports of entry. But between the ports of entry, and particularly in my district, east of Douglas all the way to the New Mexico state line, it's wide open territory, and that's where Rob Krentz was killed 3 years ago. We have the cartels, the drug cartels, coming out of the mountains, through the mountains out of Mexico, going onto the land on which these ranchers and their families live. And they're fearful, and they feel that they're threatened every day. We can't let that happen. We have to ensure their safety, and I think that's an area where the Border Patrol has to pay a lot more attention to make sure that no American should feel unsafe in their home because of drug cartels. We have to fix that problem.
And you've also recently had an Inspector General report that looked at the metrics that the Border Patrol is using and determining how effective they are.
Well, I'm a member of the Homeland Security Committee, and this year I'm the ranking member on the Oversight Subcommittee of that committee. And part of my job, as I see it, is to make sure that the money we've given to the Department of Homeland Security is spent wisely and prudently. And we have that report that you mentioned from the GAO, which lays out a very sorry picture of how the Border Patrol or DHS measures success. There really aren't credible metrics that all people accept, and we have to get to that. Because when we're talking about operational control of the border, well, how do we define it and how do we measure progress? The Department of Homeland Security has agreed that by November they'll have those metrics in place, and my job is to make sure that that is expedited and that they're good metrics. And I've said through amendments to the bill that we passed out of my committee, Homeland Security Committee, that it has to include input from people who live and work along the border. It has to include input from Border Patrol agents and all the other folks who really know what's going on. And our bill actually requires the department to do that.
And it's a key element of the Senate bill as well, in terms of allowing the people who are in the country and undocumented at this point into moving forward towards the path to legalization.
Yeah, the Senate bill is on the right track. It is focusing on the need for border security where it doesn't exist. And it's then the principles I think are essentially the right ones, finding a legal way for people to come and work here where we need workers and to go home, making sure that we address the young people who came here through no fault of their own, who want to go to college or into our military, the DREAM Act, dealing with high-tech worker needs. Certainly in this part of the world, in this part of the state, we have a need for people who have those skills. And then, of course, the 11+ million people who are here illegally in the shadows, we've got to bring them out. But we've got to do it in an efficient and a fair way. We have to make sure that they don't get special treatment. They have to go to the back of the line because a lot of people before them who applied for entry to this country, and they should be treated first. They should be served first.
I know you've expressed disappointment that the background check legislation in the Senate did not go further.
Yeah. Well, you know, the background check bill was a disappointment. Let's not forget that 55 members of the Senate actually voted for it. And unfortunately, you know, it takes 60 votes anymore to get anything through the Senate. I think that issue is going to come back. But I'm mostly focused in my work in the Congress on mental health as an aspect of gun violence prevention. I have a bill that was introduced in the House, bipartisan bill, that is actually part of a package that was approved by the Senate, 95-2. There's a large omnibus mental health bill. It's moving forward. We think it's going to come to the House. And if we can have those kinds of that kind of legislation, I think we'll go a long way to helping resolve the issue of people who are a danger to themselves or others being able to have guns. They need treatment, but they also need not to be able to have access to weapons.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. But thank you for stopping by Arizona Illustrated Politics.
Thanks, Jim. It's really great to be with you.
The Gang of Eight's comprehensive immigration reform plan has passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but still must get out of the Senate before facing a fight in the U.S. House of Representatives. Jeff, we heard Congressman Ron Barber earlier say that he is concerned about his constituents who are still living in fear along the border in rural areas. Other people in the Democratic Party say that this plan put forth by the Senate Judiciary Committee leans too heavily on enforcement issues and too much additional militarization of the border. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, like any compromise, people are going to get some things they want, and they're going to have to give up some things that they wanted as well. For instance, one of the things that I was very disappointed to see is not part of this bill is protection of LGBT members who have a spouse or a partner that they could sponsor and bring in. That amendment was pulled when it looked like it was going to lose the support of some of the Republicans who are supporting this. So I think like all compromises, everybody's going to have to give up something to get some of the things they want. And I think overall this is a pretty good bill as it stands right now. As far as the trigger for the path to citizenship, they have to show that at least 90% of the people are being apprehended who are crossing the border in all of these critical sectors, such as Ron Barber's district. So I think that's probably, you know, something we're going to have to give up. And I hate to see that increased militarization of the border as well. But I think these compromises have to be made if we're going to have comprehensive reform.
And Frank, you've said in the past that you think that there's not enough enforcement in this bill, and that the path to citizenship is a little too easy. And on the other side of that, you have fellow Republicans like John McCain and Jeff Flake saying that they feel like this bill is very important in order to help Republicans win back some of the Latino voters that they've lost in recent years since the George Bush election. Your thoughts on how important it is in terms of just the political element of recapturing the Latino vote?
Well, I look at it this way. Okay, people that share the same values of the Republican Party will vote for Republicans. People that share the values of the Democratic Party will vote for Democrats. The reality is, I don't care what your skin color is. I don't care what your nationality is. If you believe in the free market, individual freedom, and you believe in limited government, you're a Republican. What I don't want is a bunch of people that have a belief in a socialized sort of government where the government mandates, regulates, and tells everybody what to do, all of a sudden be granted the ability to vote, because they will likely, if they particularly come from a country like, let's say, Venezuela, where they like socialism down there and they come here and they want to bring that brand of government here, that would be troubling to me. So I don't really care what ethnicity anybody is. I believe if you believe in the principles, then fine. And that's what the party should be focusing on, not race-baiting politics that the Democrats have done for years and use it and bring it into the Republican Party. Again, I believe in a colorblind society. I don't care what color you are or where you come from. You got to believe in the principles and the founding principles of this country in order to be, I believe, a good Republican and a good American. So I don't see any impact on that other than basically pandering is what I think that they're trying to say. I don't think the immigration bill is going to make it. I think the Speaker of the House already said it's dead on arrival. There isn't enough enforcement in there. There is too easy of a pathway to citizenship in that bill too. And I've seen also now the labor unions are now coming out in opposition because of the visa expansion that's being put in there, where people originally were supposed to be for farm workers only. Now it's a lot of other industries that are going to be able to allow people to immigrate here, and the unions have problems with that. So I think this thing's going to fall apart. The bigger it gets and the more stuff they stick in there trying to make it better, the more people that they sort of alienate as well. And it's well over 1,000 pages now. So it's getting like Obamacare, where it's going to be so huge and big, nobody's going to read it, and we'll have to pass it to find out what's in it.
Miguel, your thoughts on the...
I think the color of business right now is brown. I mean, the smart business owners right now, the chambers, all recognize how healthy the economy of Sonora is. And the smart business leaders right now recognize that you got to do more to attract more visitors, do more business. And the political landscape has changed in Arizona. I don't think that people are looking from leadership from Republicans or Democrats right now because they've messed it up so badly. But what we got to do right now is really find easier ways to make commerce flow from Sonora.
Now, what do you think of the immigration bill that's coming out of the Senate Judiciary?
I don't know. I haven't really given that as much thought. I've been thinking more locally as to how that discussion is happening in D.C. is affecting leadership here locally, what the chamber leaders are saying. I'm curious to see how we will address the downfall of SB 1070 and all the arguments that have been taking place 2 years ago, how that's going to be changed now. Because I think a lot of folks are kind of have to choose between taking the Marco Rubio approach. Do we love them? Do we not love them? Do we try to be like them? There's just the Republican Party, unfortunately, doesn't know how to deal with the Mexican and Latino business owners or consumers. And I don't think the Democratic Party should rest on their laurels either. I don't think that they should just assume that they will get the Latino vote.
All right. And Jeff?
Well, we got to bring 11 million people out of the shadows. I mean, this is just, it's intolerable. It's gone on way too long. It's time, and I think that most Republicans understand that. I think that the problem is that a lot of them are from safe districts where they're looking to get primaried by someone from the Tea Party wing of the party if they vote in favor of this. So
always throw out the Tea Party.
It may well fall apart in the House, but there seems to be. I think it will pass the House, something similar to this, if they allow a full vote on the floor of the House, because there are enough Republicans to join with the Democrats to pull this through. But if they invoke the sort of Hastert rule that a majority of the majority has to approve of it, then it's probably going down.
We've been down this road before. In 1986, that very same argument. We got to bring these 3 million people out of the shadows. So we've got to grant this amnesty. But we're going to put in these enforcement measures. We're going to enforce the border. We're going to do workplace enforcement. Trust us. Wink, wink, nod, nod. The voters aren't stupid enough to fall for the same thing twice. They wanted immigration reform. They gave the federal government the benefit of the doubt, and they blew it. So this time there has to be strict performance measures in place, and there has to be benchmarks that have to be tangible and substantive in order for the voters to buy it. And they're not there, and I don't think it's going to fly.
There's the 90% number, and there's also one of the 300 offered amendments, 200 of which were debated, was a mandatory audit of all of the Homeland Security Department as vis-a-vis it affects immigration.
I think even people like the governor are starting to change their approach. They recognize that this whole rhetoric of heads throughout the desert, and this incredible invasion and such danger on the border is just silly rhetoric. And I think that people are
tell
going to start
poor
to do
Rob
that.
Prince that and his widow about the rhetoric on the border.
There are cases everywhere. There's cases everywhere.
Let's change the topic because we're going to be obviously debating this in the future, but I wanted to talk about the Medicaid expansion. And Frank, you were in the news this week because you announced that you're interested in doing a referendum that would actually try to repeal the Medicaid expansion if it does get through the House and is signed by the governor. What are you up to here?
So Senator Ron Gould and I have gotten together along with Christine Bauserman to form a committee known as the URAPC Committee, or the United Republican Alliance of Principled Conservatives. And we are going to put an effort forth using the precinct committeemen and volunteers and other organizations that want to help us, an effort to collect 86,000 signatures to refer whatever legislative action comes out of the legislature, if it in any way, shape, or forms validates or approves or brings Obamacare into the state of Arizona, we're going to refer it to the ballot and have the voters reject it.
And the governor's office is saying you don't have the legal authority.
Well, I kind of laughed. This is the same legal advice that said she could run for a third term, and the Constitution said she wasn't term limited. So I don't put a lot of stock in the governor's legal advisors. I think there are several people that have come out and said we're right and we can refer it to the ballot. And the threshold of 86,000 signatures in 90 days is a tough but doable amount. And I think we have a large number of volunteers. That number, we're coming close to 1,000 people now. We had just 500 just over the weekend. Now we're going to push. We got almost 1,000 people that have emailed us at the urapc.org website telling us they want to help us out with this, and I think it's going to explode. And we're going to have plenty of people and have no trouble getting the signatures to do this.
And Jeff, you're a lawyer. There's legal issues here. Would you weigh in on that?
Well, I hate to say it, but I think Frank's right here. This is referable to the ballot. What the case that said it was not referable had to do with really just appropriations. And so here you've got a conceptual issue of the expansion of Medicaid, and you've got the appropriation issue. So the conceptual issue is surely referable to the ballot. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And then we've had our own issues with the governor's legal advisors in the past, so I think they've got that one wrong. But the fact is that the voters have voted twice before in the last 20 years to expand our version of Medicare access, which is by far and away the most economical use of Medicaid funding in all of the United States. It was put together during the Babbitt administration. And so I think the voters are probably going to reject Frank's proposition here. They're going to understand that this is a very small thing to give people who only 133% of the poverty level, which would be a family of four making around $20,000 a year, health care.
But it would put it on hold until an election in 2014.
That would probably be the greatest damage.
And doesn't this expire? Isn't there an amendment in this?
It does. It sunsets in 3 years.
To expire shortly after.
Oh, and there's all sorts
election.
There's circuit breakers in there as well.
Yeah.
That are in play here as well. So the thing is this. Just 2 years ago, the voters overwhelmingly supported Prop 106 that basically said we don't want Obamacare in the state of Arizona. That measure passed. And when the voters find out that the legislature quietly and the governor quietly passed this, many of which against their wishes, more than 58% of the people in the state when polled say they oppose Obamacare, 85% of Republicans, 62% of independents don't want it. And when that goes to the ballot, Jim, I think you're going to see a resounding rejection of what the governor did.
The problem here is that 90% of the people who are opposing so-called Obamacare are against the mandate. They're not against expansion of health insurance for poor people. And that is what has passed by large margins.
I have to say that I do compliment you. I heard you on the John C. Scott show, Frank, yesterday, and you did mention some concern about how small businesses will be dealing with this. And I think both parties need to pay more attention as to how small businesses are able to cope with this kind of these ideas and proposals. That said, I sense that there's many Republicans are not they didn't get the memo. They didn't get the memo. It's a different state now, and to try to paint this as Obamacare, I mean, it's just not gonna fly.
Oh, it is flying. It is Obamacare. It's one of the three key provisions of Obamacare.
One of the key three provisions is
so what is it then?
Obamacare.
Okay, so
and the other thing about the expiration, Jim, what expires at the end of this year is an agreement we have with the federal government that gives us some additional federal funding of some of the people who are now on access. That will expire, and a lot of people will have to be thrown off of it, or as some people have suggested, even Republicans in the legislature, the state will have to spend millions of dollars more to make up for that. So that's what's expiring, and that's where the big problem we're going to be in from the end of this year until the vote takes place.
Well, so this is going to be a complex legal thing.
Yeah, but Kathleen Sebelius says that she cannot right now look at eliminating a lot of waivers for a lot of states because they're already running behind on the implementation. So I don't put a lot of stock in that argument that they're going to get kicked off automatically.
Okay. We'll see how this plays out, but there's time. Miguel, I wanted to talk about this whole controversy about Grand Canyon University and the El Rio golf course. You were one of the people who thought it was a bad idea to put the university there, and this week Regina Romero, the councilwoman, came out and said that she was now opposed to this. Your thoughts on how this played out?
It was a terrible idea. I mean, I haven't been around as much as these gentlemen, engage and Jim, but it was one of the worst political blunders I've seen in a long time. You could not win. Councilmember Romero proposed building a private university on public land, 100 acres, unheard of, unprecedented. It's never happened. Not only that, but she threw a rock at a hornet's nest that consists of Scott Egan, Margaret McKenna. It united the golfers. There's some issues regarding the Grand Canyon that is not the best thing for veterans. I mean, you couldn't have built a worse situation. But now my real concern is that we look for leadership. We look for economic development for her to really deliver on that. But she will be remembered as failing doing that. And the other thing that I think is really bizarre. You never bring up something where you put other Democrats or Republicans, your colleagues, in a tough situation. Councilmember Ulick is silent right now, and there's a reason for that. What do? Do you call out your colleague, Councilmember Romero, and say this is a terrible idea? At the same time, is giving life to Ben Bueller, who's running it. It's like there's an issue now.
We have a minute left, but Frank, you thought this was a golden opportunity for the city.
Well, we're talking about a large number of jobs, making income well over $50,000, $60,000 a year that would have brought a lot of money into the local economy. It would have taken away basically an asset that's been losing hundreds of thousands of dollars each year and replaced it with one that's generating revenue for the city. Gee, sounds like a pretty no-brainer to me, but again, politics was interjected in this. Steve Kozachik came out slamming the university.
Should we put a Hilton at Reed Park?
So this is purely anti-Walmart.
To sum it up, right idea, wrong place. And I mean, we were probably still going to see Grand Canyon University within the city limits. I think there's a good shot at it. There's several other sites they're looking at, and there's certainly going to be somewhere in Pima County, but maybe well in the city limits. But this wasn't the right place.
Terrible idea, terrible place. We expect more. We want jobs. We want smart economic development plans from Ward 1, not like things that are dead upon arrival.
Much like many businesses in Tucson, it's Oro Valley, here we come, and that's where everybody's going to be going because of the anti-business politics of this city.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I'd like to thank my guests, and we will be right back with some closing thoughts. That's our show for tonight, but you can learn more about politics by visiting azpm.org or by following us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching another edition of AZ Illustrated Politics.